السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طيب بسم الله. Where did it go? بسم الله. خير لا بأس. We will do without it إن شاء الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن عين لا تدمع ومن نفس لا تشبع. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. أما بعد. So we are beginning tonight, inshallah ta'ala, a new topic. Bi-idhnillah. We ask Allah for sincerity and success. And the topic, as you have heard, is Shama'il, which is the study of the description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So first and foremost, welcome to this gathering. There are some familiar faces and some new ones. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for coming and make this a gathering that is beneficial for us and will elevate our rank and status and increase us in beneficial knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ is an important figure and individual for us in our lives. I think that's an important starting point that we all agree upon. And if you were here for Jumu'ah, if you were here for the khutbah, we tried to spend a few moments to talk about why it is important to be attached to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to love him alayhi salatu wasalam. So we don't want to spend too much time on those details. You can check out the khutbah or the plethora of other lessons that outline that. But the idea is part of growing in our love and attachment for the Prophet ﷺ is to be familiar with him and aware of his life and his times, his comings and his goings and his dealings and everything that had to do with him alayhi salatu wasalam. That's how you increase in love. That's how you increase in appreciation. The more you know about someone, the more you have, the more context you have to grow in your attachment to that individual. In the process of studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ, there are a few different ways to do so. We often hear the word Seerah. Anybody hear the word Seerah before? What does it mean? Yes. Okay, it's often used to refer to the life of the Prophet ﷺ, but it generally refers to a biography, or it refers to how a person lived their life. Most books of Seerah and most classes of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ are chronological in nature and event-based. Chronological in nature and based on events that took place during his lifetime that he was involved in. So has anybody here been to a Seerah class or read a book of Seerah? Okay, mashallah. I think that's more than 50% of the hands. That's really good. So it will usually begin before even the birth of the Prophet ﷺ and talk about the lineage and the family and the events that led up to his birth alayhi salatu wassalam. Then it will go through his childhood and what we know of the events that took place then and early adulthood. All of this is before he is a messenger. This is when he is Muhammad ibn Abdullah, a member of the Meccan Quraysh community. Then there is revelation. There is discussion of his relationships, of his marriage to Khadija, of his relationship with his mother who passed away at a particular age, of his grandfather, of his uncle, of his other uncles, paternal mainly in that period of time in his life, etc. All the way up until his death, alayhi salatu wassalam. So that's usually how books of seerah and classes of seerah, that's usually the pattern that they go through. And that's one way of learning about his life. There is another which was very common classically. It's not as common today outside of the discussions of seerah, but classically the scholars did give writings specific to the aspect of his life that were involved in military expeditions and battles and encounters on the battlefield. They called it al-Maghazi. This was one section of study within seerah. And that's because there were a lot of events. And so you see the Prophet ﷺ as a leader of a state and as a strategist and dealings with other groups and other factions that were necessarily that were showing animosity to the Muslim community, and how the Prophet handled those situations. So nowadays you'll find most of those contained within the discussions of seerah. In addition to all of that, there is another method of learning about the Prophet ﷺ, and not to say that it is better or it should be done other than studying the seerah, but it's complementary, is what is referred to as Shama'il. It is what is referred to as Shama'il. Shama'il, what does it mean in Arabic? Well, literally in Arabic it is plural for shamal, which means what? Huh? Left. You know, you have your right hand, al-yamin, and you have your left hand, al-shimal. And so the plural of left is Shama'il. Technically, that's just a very literal, linguistic meaning of the word. Just FYI, for your information. Technically, its usage refers to طبع الإنسان, سجية الإنسان, a person's demeanor, a person's how they carried themselves. It tells you some descriptive details about how the person appeared. If you were to look upon this person, now you can study someone's biography, right? You can study someone's biography and you know the events of their life, right? And dealings and interactions. And someone comes and tells you, draw a picture of this person. Now you're going to, no, we're not talking about drawing a picture of Muhammad ﷺ. Everybody just calm down. I'm just saying theoretically, someone else. And you would draw a picture of that person and it would be completely different than what it is in reality. But the idea of Shama'il is for you to have an image of the Prophet ﷺ in your mind. And can you do that? All of a sudden the room got into pin drop silence, right? Because when you start talking about images of the Prophet ﷺ, then everybody gets really sensitive. Some obvious reasons and some reasons I've yet to understand why. Yes, of course you can. Most definitely. Yani, do you think the Sahaba never looked at the Prophet ﷺ ever? Some of them actually, by the way, on that note, take a quick tangent. Some of them were in such awe of the Prophet ﷺ that they didn't used to stare directly at him, actually. On that note, by the way. Yes, some of the Sahaba did used to do that. But the Sahaba saw the Prophet ﷺ and they looked at him. And we have a plethora of narrations that describe to us how he looked. Hearing about someone is not the same as seeing them. Right? I mean, it's very obvious. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that we happen to live at a particular time and place where we are not in physical contact with the Prophet ﷺ. We don't see the Prophet ﷺ physically in his image. Is that a problem necessarily? No, it's not a problem. Allah decreed and decided for us to be living at this time, and that's for a good reason and wisdom and purpose. It's our job to make the best of it. نَعِيبُ زَمَانَنَا وَالْعِيبُ فِينَا. The poet said we like to criticize the times that we live in, but we are really what should be criticized. So the idea of Shama'il, this topic of study here, is to understand the description of the Prophet ﷺ. Not only physical description, by the way, but even things like, for example, so the different chapters that we will explore in this particular book, and I'll get to what the book is, inshallah, and why it's important. But you have, for example, did the Prophet ﷺ have any accessories or jewelry, clothing, a ring? Did he have a footwear, headwear, hair? The Prophet ﷺ, what kind of hair was it? How did he walk? How did he talk? How did he sit down? How did he lay down? How did he sleep? How did he eat? How did he cry? How did the Prophet cry? How did he laugh? How did he look when he got angry? How did he express anger? Did he ever get angry, the Prophet ﷺ? How was that expressed? I know how I am when I get angry. It is not a pretty sight. Did the Prophet ever get angry? How did that look? Right? So all of these are his food. What did he eat? What did he like to eat? How did he like to prepare his food? Things like that, right? These are not questions that you're going to get answered necessarily, generally speaking, from traditional study of Seerah. That's why the ulama had this extra category of publication and this extra category of research and compilation called Shama'il. And really at the some of it is descriptive. Well, all of it is descriptive, and some of it is prescriptive. Does that make sense? So all of it is descriptive to describe how the Prophet ﷺ was. Now some of that description is prescriptive, meaning some of it is what we would actually implement. Other aspects of it are not necessarily mandatory to implement, but it gives us context. It gives us an understanding of how he lived on a day-to-day basis. So for example, I'll give you an example of the descriptive, prescriptive. The ulama, they talk about clothing, the dress. That's one of the things we're going to talk about. How did the Prophet ﷺ dress? How was his clothing? Now, when we come upon that, that's descriptive in nature. It's describing. But is it descriptive only and then stop? Or is it also prescriptive, meaning I should dress the same way the Prophet ﷺ dressed? So that's something that we will get into. So there's a lot of tangential and tertiary questions that rise up when you learn and you discuss the description of the Prophet ﷺ. Inshallah ta'ala, these are things we will aim to delve into, inshallah ta'ala. But really, the purpose of it is to have a better understanding of who he was and how he was. It's okay to have an imagination. Allah created you with one. I hope, inshallah ta'ala, that you leave hearing this discussion and you are able to conjure an image of the Prophet ﷺ for yourself. I hope you are able to do so. That would be a nice thing to do. And especially when it comes to children. Any of you here are parents? It's really hard to teach a child to love someone and then they can't have an image of them. As human beings, we are visual in nature. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, yes, is there discussion about the permissibility and the respect of drawing images of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, absolutely. That's something that is abstained from. But I'm talking internally, you and me, in your mind, in your imagination. When you think of the Prophet ﷺ, you should be able to think of some of these characteristics. They should come to mind. And what's that going to do? It will naturally allow you to have more love. Naturally. Just by knowing it, you're going to increase in your love. And when you increase in your love, you will increase in your obedience, in your following of the Prophet ﷺ, in your attempt to emulate and practice his character. So that's what a Shama'il is. The book that we are using mostly as a guide is Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya by Imam at-Tirmidhi. by Imam at-Tirmidhi. Now, this is not the only book of this nature, nor was it the first. Some scholars mentioned that the teacher of Imam at-Tirmidhi was one of the earliest to publish a book of this nature. Wallahu alam. And then not all manuscripts have made it to publication. A lot of times we know about a book in Islamic history that was written, but we don't have the actual book with us anymore yet. And then sometimes new manuscripts are discovered. Wallahu alam. Imam at-Tirmidhi is the famous scholar of hadith that we often hear referred to when we talk about the famous 6 books of hadith, Sunan at-Tirmidhi or Jami' at-Tirmidhi. So he is also the compiler of that hadith collection as well. This is different. Some of the ahadith here in this book are also included in his voluminous text of Jami' at-Tirmidhi, but not all of them. And sometimes the text or the meaning of the hadith is similar, but the specific narration is not present in his book Jami' at-Tirmidhi. His name was Abu Isa, Mohammed ibn Isa at-Tirmidhi. Actually, the lineage was much longer, but we don't want to get too academic on you because you might fall asleep. So his name was Abu Isa, Mohammed ibn Isa at-Tirmidhi, and he died approximately in 297 of the Hijri calendar. So relatively early in the timeline of Islamic scholarship. So he published this book, Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya, Shama'il al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There are others that came after him as well that were really awesome. There is of the later scholars, Al-Qadi Iyad. Qadi Iyad, who was from present-day Morocco, and he was a great heavyweight Maliki jurist, and he had a very famous text called Ash-Shifa fi ta'rifi huquq al-Mustafa, and this is also one of the most popular texts of this nature. And he also goes into more detail than Imam at-Tirmidhi in that text, and he talks about the rights of the Prophet ﷺ upon us, in addition to descriptive narrations. Ibn al-Jawzi also has a similar al-Wafa fi ta'rifi huquq al-Mustafa, etc. So there are several others. This one happens to be one of the most popular because of its concise nature. It's not very long. It's relatively concise and abridged. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that this text gets a lot of acceptance throughout the circles of study. Imam at-Tirmidhi was one of the heavyweight giant scholars of Islam, not only in hadith, but at the area when he lived in, hadith was the main method of learning knowledge and learning the tenets of the religion. And he was someone who worked very hard in his study of hadith. There's a famous story. In those days, the scholars were very serious, very diligent upon learning hadith, and they committed the knowledge that they heard to memory, and in what would seem to us today as quite miraculous. So there's a funny, kind of funny story that happened with one of his teachers, that he went to one of the prominent teachers to learn, and his teacher recited to him several hadith, more than a dozen, and he had some notes that he was writing the hadith. Now, subhanAllah, he ended up losing those papers. So when he came to the next lesson, the teacher wanted to quiz him and test him on what he had related in the previous gathering, but he didn't have those papers. Now, he didn't want to embarrass himself and seem like he was not serious, so he just picked up some papers in front of him, and he, made it seem that he was reviewing the hadith that he had wrote. Shortly thereafter, the teacher noticed and said, "Man, those pages are blank. What kind of, you making a fool of me or something? Are you taking your studies seriously?" So he said, please just slow down with me. It's not that I am not taking it seriously, but anyways, I don't need the papers because I memorized every single hadith that you told me. And the teacher did not believe that. So he told him, I don't think you're. So he wanted to test him. He said, recite back to me every single hadith. So Imam at-Tirmidhi narrated back to him every single hadith word for word as he had heard it from him. So when we talk about these early scholars of Islam in those generations, that were very diligent, especially in that era, with the knowledge of learning and compiling the hadith, the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, they were serious. They were very, very serious in their endeavors. And he traveled far and wide, and he studied with the most prominent scholars at his time, and some of his students were some of the most prominent students of that time as well. I got the opportunity to go through this text more than once with different teachers in Medina, alhamdulillah, and it was a beneficial and enjoyable experience. So inshallah ta'ala, let's begin with the first chapter of the text. Any questions before we move on? Yes. That's a great question. Does anybody know the answer to that question? I was thinking that as I was coming here. I was like, I know someone's going to ask me that, and I don't know the answer to it. I'm not very well versed with English. Oh, the question was, is the book translated? Is Shama'il at-Tirmidhi translated in English? It is? Walid is saying yes. Is it a good translation? Because sometimes no translation is better than a bad one. Sometimes. So the brother is saying it is. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll do a quick search at the end of the lesson. The internet is really close to our fingertips. So we'll do a quick search at the end of the lesson, inshallah, and inform you if it is. And if it is, you can pick it up. I'd recommend that. That's a good question. Tirmidhi is actually a place he was born in a city which is that's the name of the city is Tirmidhi or Tirmidhi, present day Uzbekistan. In those days they referred to that region as, or even till now they refer to that region as Bukhara. And Imam Bukhari, nisbatan ila Bukhara, was actually from that close to that region as well, not the same township. Somebody showed me a map one time a few years ago with the most notable and famous scholars of hadith, like Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Sijistani, As-Sijizi, right? Tirmidhi and Nasa'i, right? Some of these famous scholars, Daraqutni. So someone showed me a map, and there was a big concentration of these scholars in that region. In the region of Uzbekistan, and even what is present-day Iran. Some of the biggest scholars of hadith came from those regions. So they were not Arab. That's an interesting point. They were not of Arab ethnicity. As a matter of fact, some of the greatest scholars of Islam and of the Arabic language were not of Arab ethnicity. There's a funny story about the most notable scholar of Arabic language was someone known as Sibawayh. You guys heard this name before? Sibawayh. He was known as the prince of the scholars of Arabic language. There's a funny story, Allahu A'lam, what the authenticity of it is. One of our teachers of grammar was sharing that an Arab Bedouin man was told about Sibawayh. Now, nowadays, Arab Bedouins are, they have their own sort of iterations of Arabic language. In those days, that's where the classical Arabic was preserved. So he was someone who prided himself on his command of the classical Arabic language and of eloquence in it. And when someone told him that there's someone, the most knowledgeable man in the land of Arabic is actually this Persian man, Sibawayh, this is a Persian name, he was furious, and he said, I am going to go and find him. So he went to Iraq. Sibawayh was in present-day Iraq at that time. And he went to him, and the story says, Allahu A'lam, the story says that he went to his home, to the place where he resided, and he knocked on the door, and the housemaid or the nanny of the house basically is the one that responded. And so he asked her, Aina Sayyiduki, where's your boss, where's the man of the house? And so she said to him, Fa'a ila al-fay'i liyafi'ana al-fay'u fa'idha fa'a al-fay'u fa'. Do you understand that? Me neither. And she constructed an entire sentence of his whereabouts, all of them derivatives of the same root word. Like it's like next level, like it would make Shakespeare look very silly, like on that level. And so he was dumbfounded, and he said, إذا كان هذا جاريته فكيف بسيدها? And he's مع السلامة, I'm done. He said, if this is how the housemaid, if this is how eloquent she is, then I don't even want to meet her boss. So he left. He left. So, inshallah, at the end of the lesson, I will tell you, inshallah ta'ala. But the idea is, what's the point behind all of this is some of the most notable scholars of this religion, of this language, were not people that were of Arab ethnicity. So the next time somebody tells you Islam is a big Arab party, you can tell them about Imam at-Tirmidhi. طيب, let's begin inshallah ta'ala. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. قال الحافظ أبو عيسى محمد بن عيسى بن سورة الترمذي باب ما جاء في خلق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. حدثنا أبو رجاء قتيبة بن سعيد عن مالك بن أنس عن ربيعة بن أبي عبد الرحمن عن أنس بن مالك أنه سمعه يقول كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس بالطويل البائن ولا بالقصير ولا بالأبيض الأمهق ولا بالآدم ولا بالجعد القطط ولا بالسبط. بعثه الله تعالى على رأس 40 سنة فأقام بمكة 10 سنين وبالمدينة 10 سنين وتوفاه الله على رأس 60 سنة وليس في رأسه ولحيته 20 شعرة بيضاء. قال حدثنا حميد بن مسعد البصري قال حدثنا عبد الوهاب الثقفي عن حميد عن أنس بن مالك قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ربعة ليس بالطويل ولا بالقصير حسن الجسم وكان شعره ليس بجعد ولا سبط أسمر اللون إذا مشى يتكفأ. قال حدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا محمد بن جعفر قال حدثنا شعبة عن أبي إسحاق قال سمعت البراء بن عازب يقول كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رجلا مربوعا بعيد ما بين المنكبين عظيم الجمة إلى شحمة أذنيه عليه حلة حمراء ما رأيت شيئا قط أحسن منه صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال حدثنا محمود بن غيلان قال حدثنا وكيع قال حدثنا سفيان عن أبي إسحاق عن البراء بن عازب قال ما رأيت من ذي لمة في حلة حمراء أحسن من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم له شعر يضرب منكبيه بعيد ما بين المنكبين لم يكن بالقصير ولا بالطويل. قال حدثنا محمد بن إسماعيل قال حدثنا أبو نعيم قال حدثنا المسعودي عن عثمان بن مسلم بن هرمز عن نافع بن جبير بن مطعم عن علي بن أبي طالب قال لم يكن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطويل ولا بالقصير شأن الكفين والقدمين ضخم الرأس ضخم الكراديس طويل المسربة إذا مشى تكفأ تكفؤ كأنما ينحط من صبب لم أر قبله ولا بعده مثله صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال حدثنا سفيان بن وكيع قال حدثنا أبي عن المسعودي بهذا الإسناد نحوه بمعناه. قال حدثنا أحمد بن عبدة الضبي البصري وعلي بن حجر وأبو جعفر محمد بن الحسين وهو ابن أبي حليمة والمعنى واحد. قالوا حدثنا عيسى بن يونس عن عمر بن عبد الله مولى غفرة قال حدثني إبراهيم بن محمد من ولد علي بن أبي طالب كان علي رضي الله عنه إذا وصف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لم يكن بالطويل الممغط ولا بالقصير المتردد وكان ربعة من القوم لم يكن بالجعد القطط ولا بالسبط كان جعدا رجلا ولم يكن بالمطهم ولا بالمكلثم وكان في وجهه تدوير أبيض مشرب أدعج العينين أهدب الأشفار جليل المشاش والكند أجرد ذو مسربة شأن الكفين والقدمين إذا مشى تقلع كأنما ينحط من صبب وإذا التفت معا بين كتفيه خاتم النبوة وهو خاتم النبيين أجود الناس صدرا وأصدق الناس لهجة وألينهم عريكة وأكرمهم عشرة من رآه بديهة هابه ومن خلطه معرفة أحبه يقول ناعت لم أرى قبله ولا بعده مثله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This first chapter has about 14 narrations. We won't go through every single one of them, but they all revolve around the physical description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They all revolve around the physical description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first hadith is reported to us by Anas ibn Malik. He says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was neither extremely tall, nor was he extremely short. In complexion, he was neither pure white nor very dark, nor brown, which results in darkness. He was radiant, illuminant, more luminous than even the full moon on the 14th night, in the middle of the month. The hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was neither very straight nor very curly, but slightly wavy. When he attained the age of 40, Allah the Almighty granted him prophethood. He lived for 10 years in Mecca and in Medina for 10 years. At that time, there was not more than 20 white strands of hair on his head. You might have heard a couple of numbers there that you are confused about. We will comment on it. I just wanted to translate the narrations. On his blessed head and beard. The second narration we read, also reported by Anas ibn Malik, he says Rasulullah was of a medium stature. He was neither very tall nor very short. He was very handsome, of medium build, and his hair was neither very curly nor very straight, but was slightly wavy. He had a wheat-colored brown complexion. When he walked, he leaned forward slightly. We read a narration of Al-Bara ibn Azib, where he described the Prophet ﷺ wearing a red cloak. He says, I have never seen anything more beautiful than him before. And then the last narration that we read, which is a bit lengthy, you will see that some of the details are repeated, and that's why we won't go through every single narration. But Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he was asked about the description of the Prophet ﷺ, he used to say, Rasulullah was neither very tall nor short, but of medium stature among people. His hair was neither very curly nor very straight, but had a slight wave in it. He did not have a big body nor a round face, but his blessed face was slightly round. The complexion of Rasulullah ﷺ was white with redness in it. The blessed eyes of Rasulullah ﷺ were extremely dark and black. His eyelashes were long. The joints of the body, elbows and knees, were large. Likewise, the portion between the two shoulders was broad and fully fleshed. There was no hair on his body except for a thin line running from the chest. He had hair on his chest, and there was a thin line running from the chest down to the navel. The hands and feet of Rasulullah ﷺ were fully fleshed. When he walked, he lifted his legs with vigor, as if he were descending from a higher elevation to a lower one. When he addressed an individual, he turned his whole body towards that person. The seal of prophethood was situated between his shoulder blades. He was the last of all prophets. He was the most generous and the most truthful. He was the most kind-hearted and came from the most noble of families. Anyone who came in close contact with him and knew his excellent character was smitten with the love of his excellent attributes. Anyone who described his noble features can only say, I have not seen anyone like Rasulullah ﷺ, neither before nor after him. طيب. So these first narrations and this first chapter describe to us the physical characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ. Let's break them down in sections. Skin, complexion. In the hadith, it says, ليس بالأبيض الأمهق ولا بالآدم. ليس بالأبيض الأمهق ولا بالآدم. الأمهق أي شديد البياض. الآدم أي الأسمر أو فيه سواد. The Prophet was described as not being very white, nor was he very dark. But his skin complexion was moderate in between those two. In between those two. It's interesting that the Prophet ﷺ uses this, or the narration describing the Prophet ﷺ says he was not Adam. He was not Adam. Now, maybe we heard this to mean the name of someone, a name of a prophet. But linguistically in Arabic, Adam means asmar, meaning someone of dark complexion. Someone of dark complexion. Now, what's interesting is the Prophet ﷺ described Musa with this word. The Prophet ﷺ described Musa ﷺ, he says, Kana Adam, that he was of this dark complexion. But the Prophet ﷺ's complexion was moderate in between the two. He wasn't very white, nor was he dark in complexion, but a brown sort of color between the two. We also see in some of the other narrations describe that certain parts of his body had, on certain parts of the skin, there was some redness. There was some redness. You know, sometimes you see someone, they have a little bit of redness, for example, in their cheeks, or maybe certain body parts, there's a little bit of redness. It wasn't extreme. It wasn't the dominant color of his complexion, but it was noticeable. It was noticeable in his skin. So on the spectrum of really light and really dark, the Prophet ﷺ was in between, a little bit closer to the lighter side, a little bit closer on the spectrum, to the lighter side, with a reddish tinge in certain places, and this is common amongst many people that are of Arab ethnicity today. There is also something you will hear a lot is radiance, brightness, right? It's illuminated. What does that mean? Now, some have understood it literally, to mean that light is literally glowing from the skin of the Prophet ﷺ. Wallahu a'lam, the ulama commented on that, said that's not the case. That wasn't the case. The Prophet had many miracles, not to say that it's not something plausible. The Prophet had many mu'jizat, many miracles. But this particular description of radiance, the ulama described it as when you would see a part of the skin that didn't have any hair on it, it would be very apparent. There would be, the more appropriate word there would be brightness to it. And brightness has nothing to do with the spectrum of skin color. There is a difference between the two. Somebody could be on the far end of the spectrum of dark skin color, but there is a brightness to their complexion, to their skin. You guys know what I'm talking about? You ever seen someone? I'll never forget, there was this old man who sits in the Prophet's masjid. You know, if he's still alive, I'm pretty sure if you go there, you'll find him there. Every time I went, he was sitting there. I'll tell you exactly where. So if you want to go find him, you can find him. It's usually between Maghrib and Isha, right when you exit the masjid from the southeasternmost door, which is called Bab Bilal. You exit from Bab Bilal, and the Prophet's house will be on your right-hand side. There will be Babu Nisa, then after that is Babu Jibril, and after that is Babu Al-Baqi'. And that's where people exit from after they give salam to the Prophet ﷺ. In between that, on the right-hand side, on the floor, there's always a group of very elderly Ethiopian men that sit there. Now, at nighttime, they clear everyone out and they put some tape for traffic flow and whatnot. But if you go there during salah times, they are usually, that's their spot, and they usually do salah over there. And there's one guy in particular, every time I passed that place at that time, I saw him sitting there. And his skin complexion is extremely dark. Very dark. But there is a radiance, there is a brightness to his complexion. It's like glowing, but it's not physically glowing. It's hard to describe. But it's glowing. So the Prophet ﷺ had that kind of glow to his skin complexion. So when you read those narrations, don't understand it literally to mean that there was actually physical streams of light that were emanating, not to take away from some of his other miracles that were more miraculous than if this were to have been the case. But the description here is a glow or a brightness, even though he was not very white or pale in his skin color. How did it feel? It was very smooth and very soft. One of the Sahaba described that when he shook the Prophet ﷺ's hand, that it was softer than silk. So there was softness. I remember one time we were working out in the gym, and you know when you lift the bar, your hands get kind of rough. And so I was like, man, so it bothered me. And so the brother was like, this is a mark of manhood. So, no, it isn't, because the Prophet ﷺ's hands were very soft. So, I'm wearing my gloves next time. Get off of me. Back up. No, I'm joking. There's nothing wrong with working with your hands and having some. But the Prophet ﷺ's, just so we know, descriptive, is the Prophet ﷺ had a very smooth and soft feeling to his skin. How about stature and height? So the first thing that is mentioned in the narration is لَيْسَ بِالطَّوِيلِ الْبَائِنِ وَلَا بِالْقَصِيرِ. The Prophet ﷺ was not very tall, nor was he someone described as short. Al-ba'in al-mufarritu fi al-tul. Somebody who's very tall. Sometimes if you look at a group of people, it's like, the heads are like this, and someone's like all the way up there. So this person's really tall. Like, for example, if a basketball athlete came amongst us right now, they would tower over us. Right? They would tower over us. So that's like really tall. So the Prophet ﷺ was not, his height was not one that towered over others. It was a moderate height. But also, he was not short. So when you look at those, then sometimes there's like a space and you're like, whoop, and then someone is very short. Is being one or the other inherently good or bad? No. This is prescriptive. This is something you have no control over. Your skin complexion, your height, maybe softness, you can do something about that, maybe. But your skin complexion, your height, there's nothing you could do about that. Well, I take that back. Some people have done some things about that, but that's problematic and not something we would encourage. But the idea is this is how Allah created you. Right? So there is nothing inherently right or wrong. There were some of the Sahaba, some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ who were very tall. Some of the Anbiya were very tall. Musa, we talked about Musa earlier. كَانَ طِوَالًا. The Prophet ﷺ described him and said Musa was very tall. Musa was very tall. Adam alayhi salam, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, was described as being very tall. There were some of the Sahaba that were very short as well and stout in stature. So neither of the two is inherently good or bad. This is prescriptive. This is descriptive to get an idea of how the Prophet ﷺ stood and what was his stature like. What was interesting about the height of the Prophet ﷺ, though, when you put it in context, there are some people, when you look at them as individuals, they themselves, they look closer to the tall side of the spectrum. But once they are in a group of people, you don't necessarily notice that they are so tall. They kind of blend in. Even though they might be taller than the others, but it doesn't stick out. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ was described. Neither extremely tall nor short, moderate in between. But what was interesting is when he was within a gathering, he was not noticed to tower over anyone in the gathering, nor would he be seen as shorter than others in the gathering. And subhanAllah, this is something that personality does play a role in your perception of someone's size. There's a famous scholar, well, I'll tell you who he is, Sheikh Mohammed al-Hassan al-Dadu, famous Mauritanian scholar. Now, I've been watching lectures and videos of this guy for years, right? And it always appeared to me in videos that he was kind of taller, on the taller side. And I had seen him standing, like in khutbah, or sitting down, and this and that. So finally in Medina one time, he came to a neighboring university and he gave a lecture there, so we were really excited, so we go. And when he walked in, I'm like, man, he's shorter than I thought. You know? Like I wasn't expecting that. You know? So sometimes the way a person carries himself, the way they speak, it can kind of impact your perception of their height. And so then when you see them, you're like, oh, they're taller than I thought, or they're shorter than I thought. But the Prophet ﷺ was, when he stood next to tall people, he wouldn't seem short. If he stood next to someone who was taller than him, it didn't make him look short. When he stood next to people that were shorter than him, he wasn't towering over them. He wouldn't seem extremely tall. That's in terms of height. So skin, complexion, height. We also have in the hadith mention of the Prophet ﷺ's stature. So height, how about width? How was the Prophet ﷺ's stature? Again, it was also moderate. Moderate. And here is something that we do have some level of, our choices can have some level of impact on this one. His stature, alayhi salatu wasalam, he was well built. He wasn't huge, like he wasn't really big. I was sitting earlier today after Jumu'ah with a brother, and he was describing someone to me that he met in the course of his work as a doctor, and he said I was sitting next to someone, he said it was the two of you put together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's like intense, you know? So the Prophet ﷺ wasn't huge in stature and width, of a medium build, but we hear a few different places over here that describe his limbs and his joints as being thick and full, like meaty. You know how they say meaty? Like flesh. So it wasn't skinny or thin, but he was not fat. Actually, there is description of the Prophet ﷺ's abdomen as well, that his abdomen was in line with his chest. um, which is different than a lot of us. It's better. Now, to comment on this is something that that we can have an impact on. Now, the Prophet ﷺ always tried to be moderate in his movements, in his eating, in his and if he wanted to, he could have eaten to the point of getting a belly, but he didn't. Like, let's just be. Can we just be very blunt with each other? Because we all, not all of us, some of you, mashallah, are great, but it's kind of hypocritical for me to say these things, but let's just kind of be gentle with one another. He could have eaten at many points in time in his life to develop a gut, a belly, but he didn't. He held back. So there was moderation there. So this is something that we can achieve. So I guess it's the beginning of a new year. So people usually begin the new year with resolutions, and most resolutions have to do with weight and health generally. Am I wrong in that assumption? Or not just within our community, but generally speaking. Have you ever, don't raise your hand, not interested in anyone volunteering, but maybe anybody here have a resolution for this year, or a goal, let's call it that, of losing weight, becoming healthier? Okay, so may Allah give you tawfiq. Me too, inshallah. You make dua for me, I make dua for you. Have you ever thought that I want to have the stature of the Prophet ﷺ? We have, the media always gives us these images that you must look like this to be considered beautiful, or to be considered handsome, or to be considered fit. I don't know that the Prophet had a six-pack or this. I don't know that. That's not part of what's described. They didn't have those standards or those descriptive measures at that time. But what we do know is that he was it was meaty. So there was muscle there. There was muscle. There was strength. And that has to do with the nature of how they worked in those days. They worked. They walked. When we get to the walking of the Prophet ﷺ, that will be very indicative of his health condition, how he walked. We'll get to that next, inshallah. So the idea is, maybe this is something that can help us. Let's try to emulate the Prophet ﷺ in his moderation and in his the healthy nature of his stature. طيب, he had wide shoulders. المنكب, shoulders, ما بين منكبيه, the space between his shoulders was wide. The space here in another narration at the end of this chapter is described as a kahil, which is, anybody familiar with hijama? Anybody familiar with hijama? What do they call it? Cupping? Wet cupping? Anybody did that before? It's a prophetic medicinal practice. One of the preferred places, one of the sunnah spots, if you go to someone who does hijama, is al-kahil. It's the upper, the lower, where the lower part of the neck meets the upper part of the back and shoulders. That's one of the good places to do hijama, to do wet cupping. And that space was wide. The narration describes that space was wide. So he had wide shoulders, alayhi salatu wassalam. His joints and his limbs were proportionate. They were proportionate, very moderate and proportionate. His head, the head of the Prophet ﷺ, what's interesting? This is an interesting point, because one of the narrations says that his head was large. So the ulama, they thought about this a little bit, and because having a large head is not something necessarily praiseworthy, both physically and metaphorically. Physically, or even when you say someone has a big head. Like, both of those are not good descriptions. So they said his head appeared large when he had a full head of hair. And so they say that description was based on that he had a lot of hair. And so that made it seem larger. But otherwise, it was proportional, it was moderate in size. Its shape, it was rounded, but not fully round. It was a bit slender, but it was closer to round. Some heads, mashallah, are very round. One of my friends, and this is not good, I won't tell you who it is, But one of, it's not good to make nicknames for people, about something they don't like physically. But one of my friends, MashaAllah, Allahumma barik, his head is so perfectly spherical that, they gave him a nickname of one of these brands that makes basketballs. You have like Spalding, Wilson, this and that. Right? Because his head, is like perfectly round. Like you can have a geometry class, MashaAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ's head was not completely rounded. There was some elongated or aspect to it, but it was closer to round. It was closer to round. His hair was dark in color. So what was the color of his hair? It was very dark, and it was black. The color of his hair was black, and it was dark. ليس ولا بالجعد القطط ولا بالسبط. The Prophet ﷺ's hair was not very curly. It was not very curly and thick, nor was it perfectly straight and kind of flowing, kind of straight like that. But rather, it had a little bit of wave. It was more on the wavy side. Was his hair. When he combed it, and he would comb his hair, the Prophet ﷺ was very keen on grooming himself. When he combed it, it would look like as if you ran a comb through and made lines through the sand. Like wavy in that nature. The hair of the Prophet ﷺ was not always the same in terms of its length and how he kept his hair. So there were certain times where the Prophet ﷺ had his head shaved. Like when they went for Hudaybiyah, when they went for Umrah, the Prophet ﷺ shaved his head. So he had a completely shaved, bald head. There were other times where the length varied. So there are some narrations which describe the hair, and it would come just under his earlobes. Other narrations at different points in time say they came just below the ear. So they hung lower than his ear. And yet other narrations describe that the bottom of the hair hit his shoulders. So the length of it came down to the shoulders. So this is also something that you hear some people say sometimes. That, it's sunnah to have long hair, like as from perspective of a man. Why? Well, the Prophet ﷺ had long hair. But he didn't always have long hair. But he also shaved his head. Tfaddal, go ahead, shave your head. Like, no, I like my hair. Like, just say you like your hair. Khalas, it's halal. Have long hair. But don't impose it and say, it's because it's sunnah. Khalas, you like your hair? Bismillah, have long hair, mashallah. So the idea is the Prophet ﷺ, his hair wasn't always exactly the same at all times. But what was its color? It was dark black. The narration here says, وَلَيْسَ فِي رَأْسِهِ وَلِحْيَتِهِ عِشْرُونَ شَعْرَ بَيْضَاء. This particular narration says that he didn't have more than 20 white hairs. After he got older in age, and with age, the hair color turns gray and white. This is part of the nature of life. It has its own beauty and radiance to it. That's why the poet said one time, لدي خط وللأيام خط وما بينهما إلا مخالفة المداد فأكتبه سوادا في بياضي وتكتبه بياض في سوادي. He said, I write with a pen, and the passing of time also writes with a pen. The only difference between our pens is the color of the ink. I write black on white, and time writes white on black. So the Prophet ﷺ, he developed some white hairs, but not many. This particular narration says they were not more than 20. They were not more than 20. Some of the ulama, they commented on this, and they said that it was mainly in his lihya, that it was mainly in his beard, and there weren't many white hairs in his head. Specifically, they said it was in this hair here, underneath the lower lip, and the name of it escapes me. What is it called? Anybody know? There is a particular name for this. Huh? No. Inshallah, I'll remember it. Khair. Inshallah, I'll remember and I'll tell you. But some of the ulama, one of our teachers said that most of the white hair of his lihya was concentrated in this area. Wallahu a'lam. So there are some different opinions, but it wasn't many. The majority of his hairs did not turn gray or white, but there were some. There were some noticeable. His eyes. His eyes are described in the narration, the beautiful eyes of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What are the different parts of the eye? So you have the eyeball, right? That's white. So it was very intense in its whiteness. It was very bright in its whiteness. And actually this contrast is what made it stand out so much. The white part of the eye, is there a technical term or it's just eyeball? Sorry? Huh? Sclera? That's like the medical term? Oh, wow. Of the white part? Oh, nice. MashaAllah. Okay. Jazakumullah khairan. We learned something new today. So that was very white. Yes. The cornea? Allah ysamihkum. Yani we're going to have ophthalmology class now, yeah? It's my fault, I asked. Can we just, the white part? Masakin. I don't know. Tayyib, the white part was very white. This one I know. This one I'll get it for you, inshallah. The pupils. Right? Got this one. No debate about that one. What color was it? Black. Usually when you describe the color of someone's eyes, they say, oh, so-and-so has blue eyes. So-and-so has green eyes. So-and-so has brown eyes. But most of it is white. They're referring to the pupil area. So the Prophet ﷺ, his was black. And it was very dark black. And so that contrast was very beautiful. His eyelashes were long. We mentioned that. They were long. And his eyes were wide. His eyes were wide in shape. His eyebrows. This is also something we hear in some of the narrations. His eyebrows were thick. Allahu Akbar. Because culture nowadays says you got to have thin eyebrows to be pretty. Not the Prophet ﷺ. His eyebrows were thick. Very thick. But there was no, what do they call it? Unibrow? He didn't have a unibrow. So even though usually, most people that have very thick eyebrows, usually the hair will join in the middle, right? Generally speaking. But with the Prophet ﷺ, it was clear in between the two. And actually there's another hadith which mentions there was a vein that ran in that space in between, and it was apparent whenever the Prophet ﷺ would get very serious or he would intensify in his demeanor, that vein would kind of pop out a bit more. It would be more noticeable and more prominent, alayhi salatu wassalam. So his eyebrows were thick and they were arched. Now the individual hairs of the Prophet ﷺ were thin. But because they were plentiful, as a whole it was thick. But the individual hairs of the Prophet ﷺ were very thin. We mentioned his eyelashes were long. His nose, alayhi salatu wasalam. How was his nose? His nose was on the longer side. It was slightly longer. Not very long, يعني like awkward, but it was not short and stubby. It was on the longer side of the spectrum. His nose was long and it was relatively pointy towards the end. And it was prominent on his face. His nostrils were not very big, nor very small. They were long. We're almost done. We have to wrap up. So let's wrap up and then we'll get to some questions, inshallah. So it was of a longer, and they describe that it was slightly raised up, like kind of slightly raised up. Now there's another narration which one of our teachers commented on, where the nose was described as being slightly raised up like that. But he said actually it wasn't like that, but it's because the Prophet always stood very straight, that from the perspective of the narrator, that's how it looked to him. That it wasn't necessarily raised, but because he always stood up very straight, it appeared from that perspective that his nose was raised up. Wallahu a'lam. So just something to keep in mind. The mouth of the Prophet ﷺ was wide. His teeth, there was a slight gap in between his front two teeth, thaniyatain. There was a slight gap, a slight space between the two. And at that time, that was something that was considered very attractive. So much so, until today in some cultures, maybe not in our culture here, perhaps. It's a matter of taste, I guess. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, they say. But in those days, it was considered attractive to have a gap or a space between the teeth, so much that people used to actually do that to their teeth. If they didn't have a space, they would do it. Aflaj, they would do space between. And the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from doing that. That falls under the category of changing the creation of Allah, that they would chip away at the teeth and push them apart in an effort to have that sort of attractive image. The beard of the Prophet ﷺ, was full and it was dense. It was a thick beard, and we mentioned the white hairs that we had, and we mentioned that they were concentrated mostly in the area underneath his lower lip, alayhi salatu wassalam. And it was thick. It came out, and his mustache was trimmed, and it was thin and light. And this is part of the practices of the fitrah. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged the men to trim their mustaches and to allow their beards to grow. That was part of what so that is both descriptive as well as prescriptive. His hands and his feet, they were large in size. He had large hands, alayhi salatu wassalam. We had mentioned earlier about the joints, how they were full and his limbs were meaty. His forearms did not have a lot of hair. They did not have a lot of hair on his forearms. His fingers were thick. His fingers were thick and wide. And his hand, we mentioned that it was very smooth and soft. And his feet were they were also large and very full with flesh. And he had some extra flesh on his heels. And it would kind of swell a little bit in the hadith of Aisha, when he stood up in qiyam until his ankles, until his heels, his bottom of his feet swelled a little bit because he was standing on them so long. But they were not cracked. They were smooth, and the Prophet ﷺ was careful about about grooming him, keeping himself clean. His the arcs of his feet were high, and he had a big step. The Prophet ﷺ had a big stride. And this is also something that was described in one of the narrations. مشى إذا مشى تكفأ تكفؤ كأنما ينحط من صبب. كأنما ينحط من صبب. So in this narration, Ali ibn Abi Talib describes that when he would walk, there would be a slight lean forward. He walked with strength and with determination. Now he did not walk very fast, where it almost looks like walking, but like you're trying to jog almost. No. Nor did he walk slow. The Prophet didn't walk slow. Unless he was assisting or helping someone, or in the hadith where he was where he was following an elderly woman, then he would adjust his pace to be merciful to the person he was with. But generally the Prophet had a faster stride. كَأَنَّمَا يَنْحَطُّ مِنْ صَبَبٍ. The narration Ali describes as if you or I were walking from an elevated to a lower elevation. Like for example, like a small little elevation in the sidewalk, or like in a hill, or like in a garage, for example, You naturally, how do you walk down? You're not trying to walk fast, but just, what do they call it? Gravity. You just naturally, your stride will get longer, your pace will increase. That's how the Prophet walked on flat ground. So this goes back to his health and his stamina and the strength with which he walked, alayhi salatu wassalam. So many of these narrations end with لَمْ أَرَ قَبْلَهُ وَلَا بَعْدَهُ مِثْلَهُ قَطْ عليه حلة حمراء ما رأيت شيئا قط أحسن منه. I have never seen anyone like him before him or after him. Al-Bara ibn Azib says, I saw him wearing a red cloak. I've never seen an image of anyone more beautiful and perfect than that image of the Prophet ﷺ that I saw on that night. Now, commenting on this, by the way, the ulama, on a technical, legal note, The ulama commented, because we have some other narrations which mention the which basically discourage from wearing all red, from wearing red. So the ulama said, what's going on here? How do we, is there a contradiction going on? So the ulama have different ways of understanding this. Some of them said if the cloak or if the clothing is entirely red, entirely red, not like striped, for example, or like a red vest or red jacket, mashallah. Also, some of them talked about the hue of red. Some of them said it's not red like but it's closer to the orangish, like bright. When it's like red mixed kind of like with a saffron, very bright. Some of them said that. And they said because this was some of the color of some of the mushrikeen, some of the pagan practices. Wallahu a'lam. But the majority of the ulama said that it is not haram, it is disliked. It is not impermissible, it is disliked for the clothing to be entirely in red. And here the Prophet ﷺ, it was one particular garment that was red. It wasn't all of his clothing from head to toe. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And there are some other explanations that the ulama give. But ala kulli hal, it's not impermissible, it's not sinful. But the idea is we find so many of these narrations ending with this phrase, with this observation. I've never seen anyone like him before him or after him. I've never seen anyone more beautiful. I've never seen anyone so proportioned and so appropriate and so beautiful for me to look upon. Now there is beauty in physical characteristics, but there is also beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. There is beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to some of His creation. And that is not necessarily a beauty that you can quantify or describe with colors and with shapes and sizes, but it is a beauty, it is an attachment. It is an attractive, a gravitational pull that you may have. And that's not necessarily because of a person's physical image, but that is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them with. We mentioned a few things about Musa alayhi salam. We'll mention one more. It was said that when Musa, as a baby, came upon in front of Asya, the wife of Fir'aun, that she immediately felt so attached and so attracted to this baby, that there was a beauty and a radiance. And there are some narrations also that say that Fir'aun had the same thing as well. But because he recognized that this is a child from Bani Israel, his arrogance came in the way, and so he refused to acknowledge or accept that. But there was that attachment. Where did that come from? Look in Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَلْقَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ مَحَبَّةً مِّنِّي. Allah says about Musa, I have given you, I have reserved for you special love from me, for you. I have cast upon you special love from me, especially for you, Musa. قَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ مَحَبَّةً مِّنِّي. Allah said to Musa. So of course there would be that attachment, that attraction. And so the Prophet ﷺ also had that attractive nature, that beauty, but it wasn't a shallow beauty, but rather it was a beauty that came with awe, with haiba. Haiba is a hard word to translate into English, but it's perhaps awe is the best word, that you feel in the presence of someone very grand and noble, reverence. I like that. Someone whose presence and whose image commends respect and dignity before even they open their mouth. But the way they carry themselves and being in their presence, you cannot help but feel that you are in the presence of someone noble and have that awe. Alayhi salatu wassalam. Do you guys have an image now in your mind of how the Prophet ﷺ looked? Hold on to it, inshallah. May Allah unite us with him in Jannah, and we'll see, inshallah ta'ala, whose imagination was more accurate. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautify us with the character of the beloved Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue the first Friday of each month. So our next appointment is February 2nd, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and we'll move on to the next chapter of the description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of his Shama'il. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who listen, follow the best of what they hear. May Allah increase us in our love and attachment to our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد والله أعلم. Anybody have any questions? We will inshallah ta'ala field them. that there was some height to it. There was a little bit height to it. I don't know if arched is, Allahu a'lam. I will look into that a bit more, inshallah. Yes, but it was, yeah, you're right that it wasn't sharp and pointy. It was long. It was yeah, but it wasn't, it wasn't like a pencil straight kind of, yeah. No, that's too much. No, that's too much. Yeah, that is too much. Yes. Allahu a'lam. I don't know. There is definitely some narrations that indicate that he is from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, but I cannot remember anything now that I know of that talks about his physical description. Something, inshallah, we'll review. But there were some Sahaba that were described to resemble the Prophet ﷺ physically. Anybody heard of who? Huh? The grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, Hassan or Hussein, yes. But there was someone that was not from his direct family. Naam. Yes. Who was that? قتل في أحد. استشهد في أحد. كان الذي يحمل الراية. مصعب ibn Umair. Mus'ab ibn Umair, he was the flag bearer of the Muslim army in Uhud. And this is very interesting actually because Ibn Abi Qami'ah, who was one of the mushrikun who killed him, when he killed Mus'ab, he said, I've killed Mohammed. So the historians, they debate. They said, did he say that to cause strife within the ranks? Or did he say that because he genuinely believed that because Mus'ab resembled the Prophet ﷺ so much? Different historical ideas. But Mus'ab ibn Umair was one of the Sahaba that was mentioned that he resembled, he had many of the physical characteristics that resembled the Prophet ﷺ, and a few other Sahaba as well. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. Did we look it up? Where did Walid go? He left. Let's see if it is translated. I don't know. Shama'il, at-Tirmidhi. So I see it online, but I don't know if each. So you can find it online, translated, at sunnah.com. I actually know who made this website, so it's kind of cool. Sunnah.com, SUNNAH.com. You'll find the whole thing translated there. Sunnah.com. SUNNAH. SUNNAH.com. I don't work for them. This isn't a plug. I'm just saying. Huh? It says Shama'il, it's transliterated. It says Shama'il Muhammadiyah, the noble features of Rasulullah. The noble features. It's pretty obvious right from the homepage, so I think you will see it very clearly. Yeah, on the homepage, it's on the column to the right, at the bottom. You can't miss it. Sunnah.com. Is it in book form? Maybe. I don't know. We'll find out, inshallah. We'll find out. I'm sure a very passive Google search will give us the answer. Or Amazon search. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So you mean present day to the Prophet ﷺ, or you mean of his lineage before him? After. Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in many predominantly Muslim populated countries, I know for a fact that they had this, they still have it in Jordan and in Syria. I know this for a fact because I know someone who actually went to these facilities. So they have certain offices that are as an endowment, and they actually verify a lineage going back to the Prophet ﷺ, and they will actually certify that lineage tree. And so I actually knew someone in Medina who they gave him a bitaqa, they gave him a card. Not that you need one, يعني, or not that, not that is what is going to, but it's special, it's interesting. So they actually gave him a card that we have studied this person's lineage and their family tree, and we have verified, and we can validate and certify that this is a correct lineage going back to the Prophet ﷺ. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much about them or their religion or what they claim. But definitely not just that community, but even within the Sunni community, there's a lot of people that claim that. So there's a lot of people that say we are ashraf or we are sayyid, and it's very possible a lot of times that it could be the case, or it's possible that that's something that just gets passed on, like someone said it somewhere. And so everybody, oh, that's really cool. So everyone just kind of copied it without verifying. But it is important to verify. Is there a mechanism in place to do so? Yes, there are. Yes, there are some mechanisms and there are some endowments in the Muslim world that do study that. Is there anyone here that does it? I don't know. I don't know that. Yeah, the DNA testing, I'm not really a specialist in biology. I don't know if anybody here is, but the DNA testing kind of, it tells you more sort of on a regional. I think a lot of these, because these websites are becoming very popular, these websites where you give them a DNA sample and then they tell you, oh, you're this percentage from this region. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But that's not going to tell you of an individual. Yeah. Unless you have two individuals, then they can compare or contrast those two people's DNAs, but obviously we don't have the DNA of the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah. So again, I like your choice of, so that's a claim, but it's unverified. It's unverified. So there's no, which is amazing, by the way, if you ponder about that. We have statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Like we have a phrase, verbatim, word for word. We can trace from right now in this room, we can trace its lineage back to the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ. And not like a singular chain of people, but we can trace it to large dozens, hundreds, thousands, at certain stages of time period, hundreds of thousands that narrated this narration verbatim, right? And heard it from different pathways. And it all goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. So this is something they call tawatur, mutawatir, where it becomes so passed down and so verified. We know who heard it from who, where they heard it, and at what time. And we are able to verify the character and the strength of memory and recording of that person. This is in the science of hadith, they call it al-dabt wal-adl. Al-dabt wal-adl. Is this person adil? Is this person trustworthy? And is this person accurate? Because you could be very trustworthy, but wallahi miskeen, I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Or someone could have a sharp memory, but they told a lie once before. We scratched their name off. Right? That's how amazing the science of hadith is. And that's really saddening when people come and say, oh, it's just a hadith. It's just a hadith. It's just a saying. Like someone it's just words of someone. We have the most scientific of scientific methods to verify word for word where this came from. No other study, no other ilm, no other subject of learning has sanad the way we have it in hadith and in the Quran. Like an unbroken chain of verified narration. You can take one hadith and you can say, so-and-so heard this statement from so-and-so, who heard it from so-and-so, who heard it from so-and-so. And then we can trace each person. Are they trustworthy and are they accurate? Check. Where did they meet? Did they live at the same time? Is it plausible that they met? Yes, they met at this place, at this city. This one learned from this. And we can take that all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. We don't have that for any of his hairs or what people claim is his hair. I find that very interesting. I think there's some wisdom in that. Wallahu a'lam. But even if you do go to someone who claims to have a hair, I don't think they would allow you to do some DNA testing on it. I never asked them, but if you know someone, maybe you can ask them for us. I don't want to say it's wrong. There's no need to say it's wrong. What I will say is it's unverified. I will say that it's quite unlikely, but I'm not going to say that it's totally wrong. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible, but it's definitely not verified. That for sure we know, because we have ways of verifying what's been passed down to us from the Prophet ﷺ. But there's no reason to say that it's all a lie, it's false or made up. Allahu a'lam. I'm not going to waste any energy in debunking that. Jazakumullah khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.